Welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, thanks for joining me. 1 year ago, Barbados' first poet laureate, Esther Phillips, in her inimitable style, used poetry to describe her childhood days here in Greens. This year, 2021, we are back in Greens again for what could be regarded as Chapter 2 of Greens. Greens as seen through the lenses of Janice Perryman and other community members. Janice begins by placing her community squarely in historical perspective. To do so, she references the book of Halls, Hills and Holes, place names of Barbados written by Professor Sir Woodville Marshall with Dr. Patricia Stafford, Dr. Carol Watson and Dr. Tara Ennis.
Now, the story of Greens starts at a place that is familiar to many of the villages in Barbados. The village replaced the 111-acre Greens plantation that was owned by Fred Gill in 1907. Now, Greens had been an old plantation, the remnant of the extensive holdings which Robert Greene acquired in 1635 from the agent of the Earl of Carlisle. The plantation hardly varied in size over its long history, and it was eventually subdivided by Fred Gill in 1907. By 1911, however, 67 individual lots occupied 66 acres in the new village, and by 1924, only Gill's heirs owned a substantial lot. The name, which can be found in a mortgage agreement of 1778, replaced St. George's. The current name derived from the Greene family, who owned the plantation for about 50 years in the 17th century. Now, I'm not sure where that plantation was, but the house that is currently occupied by the Bonus family in 2nd Avenue, that was occupied by a bookkeeper, and the house owned by the late Marjorie Hoppin, that was also home to a bookkeeper. Now, let me tell you what I was told by her daughter, Cecilia Hoppin. She said that Mrs. Hoppin bought that house in 1940 for £416, 13 shillings and 4 pence, and the interest rate at that time was £6 per annum. Of course, times have changed so much since then. Now, the district of Greens starts from what we call Harewood Corner in the east and continues to the bus terminal where the bath is in the west. That stretch is known as the Front Road. Now, 1st and 2nd Avenues branch off from here, and the section which is parallel to the Front Road is known as the Back of Greens.
And speaking about the Back of Greens, it was at this point where community members...
We would all head off to Ellesmere Quarry to get marl to put around the house. Now, traveling to Ellesmere Quarry was not a pleasant experience at all. It was very steep. Some steep steps we had to go down. It was called Breakneck Hill, so you can imagine. When the guys had vacation, they spent a lot of time playing cricket, and they would play cricket all day. They would fill a mellow cream bucket, that was a metal one at that time, with swank or lemonade, and arm themselves with about 10 or 12 packages of biscuits, and off they went to Dratsall to play their cricket. Now, during that time, a guy also used to come around with an ice truck, and you bought that, the guys would buy a block of ice for 25 cents. And there was also a family-sized Coke that served the entire family at that time. We didn't have fridges at that time, but the ladies would kill the fish and put them on top of the house to dry. And that was also the time that the ham was hung in the house. And another thing, if one neighbor planted okras, the other one would plant, say, beets, somebody else would plant carrots, and everybody would share what they had with one another. And even if the neighbors were not speaking with one another, if they were not on speaking terms, they would still look out for each other. Of course, the neighborhood is one where people still share. Before I delve into the story of Back of Greens, I must pay tribute to one of the stalwarts of not only Greens, but the Back of Greens specifically, and that's the late Jennifer Phillips. She recently passed away. She was the principal of the Wilker Coming School, and she was well known in this area. The guys described her as a very generous person, one that looked out for them and always made sure that they had meals. So I want to, at this time, pray that her soul rests in peace.
Peoples, we store just got even better. Come on in. Come down to the new renovated People's Market in Tudor Bridge with bigger aisles and even more in store. All your general grocery needs. A whole new fruits and vegetables section. Beer, wine and liquor. A wide selection of meat and fish. And everything for your outdoor chilling and barbecue grilling. But most of all, everything at low prices. Right, Miss Edwards?
That's right, Ma. And now we have the People's Mall too.
People, come on down to the People's Market in Tudor Bridge.
Now, in relation to the Back of Greens, there's a gully that separates the Back of Greens from Ellesmere and Todd's. Now, that gully runs in an easterly direction and separates the eastern side from Woodland. Now, nearby there's Draxall Hope, and then there's Draxall Jump. So Greens is really nestled between those two Draxalls. And of course, the Draxall, I must mention, is the oldest of one of the three Jacobean mansions in the Western Hemisphere. Now, also in relation to the Back of Greens, I don't know if you remember when Dr. Carl Watson, historian from the university, came to Greens. He came to Greens to educate the residents of the importance and the history of the silk cotton tree, because that tree at that time, when it was blossoming, it seemed to have been affecting the neighbors, itching their skins and things like that. But because the tree is so important, it's a tree that he is so familiar with, he felt that he needed to come to Greens to educate the residents about the importance of the tree. That tree is also known as the kapok tree, but the scientific name is Ceiba pentandra. Now, since his visit, a plaque has been placed on the tree, and the residents in the immediate vicinity take very good care of it. They've taken pride in it, and they have beautified the area surrounding it. Now, sports. We also had cricket teams. We had a cricket team by the name of Starwick. That was an under-15 team. We had an under-19 team, and we also had, I'm told, a BCL team. And they would play at Draxall. And my brother also reminded me that the Back of Greens had a cricket team, and the Front Road had a cricket team. So there was that friendly rivalry that took place between those two cricket teams. Now, the bus that played the Greens district was the Elite bus. That was owned by Miss Carr from Superlative. You would have heard about her in a previous episode. The Greens bus headed east, and that turned right at Harewood Corner. So that bus would go down to the bus terminal, down by the bath, turn around, head east, and continue, turn right and continue onto Bridgetown. The St. Jude's bus would also come to that same terminal, but they would head north and continue through Prerogative, St. Jude's, Superlative, and head on into town. Now, let me tell you a story about why I explained that. There was a lady who lived in St. Michael, and she had relatives who lived here in First Avenue. But she believed that her husband was mingling with a lady from St. Jude's. So she always took the St. Jude's bus because she always used to say, I want to clap my eyes punchy. And she would take the St. Jude's bus just to see that lady. And it meant then that once she took that bus, she had to travel a long road to get to see her relatives. But the important thing was getting to see that lady and maybe putting a lash or two on her for mingling with her husband. But these days, the buses don't turn around anymore. They continue. They continue on. Whether they're coming from the St. Jude's area or the Greens area, they continue on. So the residents can catch either bus. Now, of course, the Greens bus at that time, when it was coming from town, it used to go into Draxall. We were always not so pleased, but of course, those people had to get home as well. So because that was a long, lonely, rough road. But at times, they had to divert to go into Draxall to take those residents to their homes. Of course, the last bus stopped running at 7 o'clock at that time. And the bus fare was 5 cents. Those are also the days when we had bus tickets to go to school. I don't know if you've ever heard of Lightning, but Lightning was one of the bus drivers, and he got that name because of how slowly he drove. But if anybody dared to call him Lightning, he would curse from Bridgetown to Greens. And there was the only person that could address him as Lightning was Cecilia Hoppin, but she lives overseas now. I heard a story that this lady trying to be polite one day she was coming to this area, and she went to the man and said, Excuse me, Mr. Lightning, I don't have to tell you what happened. The man quarreled from the time he left Bridgetown until he got to Greens. Now, music played an important part in this district, and in relation to, not only in relation to secular music, but religious as well. So what I would say is that this small community boasts of 3 churches. They are still functioning today. And it is important to note that the choir masters of these churches, they were skilled in solfatonic music. That is some kind of sight reading where you look, you read, you look at the notes and read. Now those choir masters were, for the New Testament, there was the late Mark Phillips. He was the father of Jennifer Phillips that I just spoke about. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was led by Leslie Merritt, and the Church of God was led by one Leon Perryman. He was known as Brother P. He practiced churches of several denominations across Barbados, the Nazarene churches, the Pentecostal churches, the Moravian churches. And interestingly, all 3 of those gentlemen were carpenters. In fact, Brother P, many residents reminded me that he worked for many people in the area, whether they had the funds or not to pay. Carolyn Kelman was also another person that practiced choirs in this church. In this area, she practiced the Church of God youth choir. Now, there was also the late Marjorie Hoppin, who I told you owned the house further across. She was the organist at St. Luke's Anglican Church. People went to church either at these 3 churches in this area, or some chose to go to St. Jude's or St. Luke's Anglican churches. Since Mr. Perryman's passing, his daughter and son continued to practice churches in the area. They did not necessarily engage in the solfatonic music. They read from the books, from the hymn books. But of course, I have to say that the musical skills were not limited to the Perryman family. There is a Bellamy family. Quite a few of those are also active in the Adventist church. So they play as well in the Adventist church. Now, since we're on the theme of music, it would be remiss of me not to mention the late Vernon Thomas, better known as Prug. Many of the people in the district, you will realize, have nicknames. He was quite prolific on the mouth organ, and he displayed those skills at the New Testament Church of God. It is important to note that a small community like Greens, with 3 churches, because it's a very small area, it was testimony to the importance that religion played in the area. Going to Sunday school, and I'm sure Sabbath school was not an option, as sadly it is today. You had to go to church. You had no say in the matter. Of course, and we also always look forward to things like vacation Bible school, and it was there that we learned a lot of craft and values were instilled in us. We also had something called youth fellowship. That was something that the children enjoyed going to on Sunday evenings. And then we also always had Christmas programs. And then there were the harvests. I remember having recitations at the harvest. A lot of children had a lot of recitations that they recited at the harvest. I don't know if that's still popular. But what I would mention about the harvest is that at that time, the produce was displayed at the front of the church, whether it was fruits, vegetables, sweet bread, corn, everything was displayed there at the front of the church, and it was offered for sale at the end of the harvest. I'm told that nowadays all of that happens on the day before, but to me that's not the same thing.
Peoples, we store just got even better. Come on in. Come down to the new renovated People's Market in Tudor Bridge with bigger aisles and even more in store. All your general grocery needs. A whole new fruits and vegetables section. Beer, wine and liquor. A wide selection of meat and fish. And everything for your outdoor chilling and barbecue grilling. But most of all, everything at low prices. Right, Miss Edwards?
That's right, Ma. And now we have the People's Mall too.
People, come on down to the People's Market in Tudor Bridge.
Now, an important part of Greens is the fact that we had quite a few centenarians, and most of them were females. Only one of them was a male. I don't know if their longevity had to do with the fact that that was the pre-fast food era, but they lived quite long. We had Mrs. Brewster. She lived until 100. Miss Felicia Carter, she lived until 101. Mrs. Rebecca Perryman, that's my father's stepmother, she lived until 100, right, 101. Let me tell you a story about her. She went into the hospital one time to get an operation. She was in her 70s. And she left the hospital without getting the operation because she said, nobody ain't cutting me. And she died at the ripe old age of 101. Then the icing on the cake is our super centenarian, the oldest woman who has ever lived in Barbados, Mrs. Louise Thorne. Thorne Road is named after her, actually. And her daughter Wendy spoke of Ma as a woman who had a strong belief in God, and she brought up her children in the same way. She remembers that there were two young boys in the area. This is in her old age, you know. There were two young boys who lived next door to her who were always fighting, and she threatened to come and beat them with her stick. Yeah, so she was that kind of woman. You know, she always used to encourage people to, you know, to respect older people and encourage them to go to church and things like that. So those four that I just mentioned, all of them used to live in Thorn Road. Then we had other gems like Mrs. Mosley. She lived on the front road. She died at 106. Then there was Mrs. Gulston, 107. And her husband reached 100. And then there was a Cordelia Scott. She died at 104. So that is at least 8 centenarians that we had in the area. Now, culinary skills were also to be found in this area. One such person was the late Mrs. Edlin Smith, or Edlin Mapp, as some people may know her. She was known for her famous pudding and sauce. People came from all over Barbados to get her pudding and sauce, from Todd's, Draxall, St. Joseph. Even the owner of Staple Grove Plantation used to come to get her pudding and sauce. And today, I'm told that people still talk about Edlin's pudding and sauce. So you cannot talk about pudding and sauce and not mention Edlin Smith's name. Then we had Archie Roach, quite an interesting character. He was the cook for all of the dances that were held at the Winter Garden Casino. If any dance that was held at the Winter Garden Casino and Archie was not the cook, may not have been well patronized. And I'm told that he also made some of the tastiest muffins around, that he went all over and sold, even as far as St. John. You just had to put a nice slice of cheese in them when they were warm. Oh. Then there was Ty Catwill. He was known for his muffins and bread and fish. Then there was another lady by the name of Miss Evelyn, known as Pension. She was also known as a top cook in the area. So we had all of those culinary skills in the area. Now, I just mentioned the Winter Garden Casino, where we had many dances. It was a multi-purpose building, but a lot of dances were held there. And I recall that when those dances were held, there were not a lot of activities for us to engage in at that time. So we were allowed to go out on Saturday nights and just peep through the window and look at the people dancing and having a good time, eating their pork chops and all that. It was also the era when service of songs were popular, so those were also held there, and it was a hub of activity on Sunday afternoons. The ladies all came out decked in their finest, and of course they had their pork chop bags. In later years, we had a community choir, and one of the girls told me that that was an attempt at reviving the service of song. I'm not sure how far it got, but it was under the leadership of the late David Nichols. And they would sing at churches, at funerals. She also told me that they sang at Queen's Park as well. So that died after some time. That shop, I should say, was owned by one of the politicians from the area, Air Hoppin. Now, the Winter Garden Casino also functioned as a kindergarten school. It was under the guidance of Mr. Gibson. And when he died, Sylvester Moore took over. And she later moved the school to the Church of God, where she was a member. And she subsequently became the pastor of that church as well. I'm told that it was also a clinic where children came to see the nurse, and a youth group also used to meet there at that time. Now, toys and games. Those were the days of homemade toys. Because, of course, our parents couldn't afford to go to town and buy any toys for us, so we had to make our own play. So we had to be satisfied with the box cart, playing hopscotch, footsies, the hula hoops, pitching marbles, and many a guy would remember that the prizes were often buttons or the same marbles. So they remember getting lashes for taking the buttons off their parents' clothes to use when they were pitching marbles. We also played things like hide and seek. We took two milk tots and played telephone. We had the footsies, pickups, where we would go and get pickup stones and play our pickups, and of course the usual cricket. The boys made their own push carts called the tralala. They also made their gutter perks. And on moonlight nights, the children played things like hitty bitty, shut up, you lat, tight, 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 a ring of roses, and the boys and girls all played together, and it was good, clean fun. There was no segregation at all. Now, we were happy when the church's annual excursion came around, because that afforded us the opportunity to leave the countryside and see another side of the country. So we would go to places like River Bay and Cove Bay and other bays, the bays that we were not accustomed to. Of course, living in St. George, we would not know anything about any bays. Parents got up early in the morning. There was peas and rice. There was pudding. There was usual sandwiches. Oh, it was a host of food that we had to take to the excursions. Now, entrepreneurship was also prevalent in this small community. And one of our most famous entrepreneurs was Orville Waith, the owner of Waith's Funeral Home. That is located on the front road. Now, he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and started this business between 1966 and 1969. Now, he first entered the business world, though, as carpenter foreman with Clark and Tucker. After soliciting jobs for Simpson Funeral Home in St. John, he was encouraged to start his own business, which he started in Waith's Road. He then purchased the land from Elliot Hardin on the front road, and he started his business there. His son told me that he got his first hearse from New York, and he ran quite a flourishing business on that front road. But then when his son Marvin returned from England in 1993, he took over the business, and he continues to practice to this day. So the funeral home is still there, and quite a flourishing funeral home here in Barbados. Shops have always played a part in communities, and Green's community was no exception. One of the shopkeepers, the shopkeeper that was opposite Hoppin, was Miss Goodrich. She used to run that shop. She was one of the more famous ones in the village. Then we had Ottie Stinthill. She also had a little shop on the front road. On the front road was also Gwendy Dottin. She and her husband, Alfred Dottin. Then we had Samuel Jones' rum shop, but he left to go overseas after a time. Then there was Motley Barrow. He was also on the front road as well. So the front road seemed to have had a lot of shops. Then we had Swing Time. He was in the back of Greens. I'm not sure, I know he was a Jones, but everybody knew him as Swing Time. So he had a more modern shop after some time, and he was a baker, and he made some of the sweetest turnovers you could find in Barbados. So, but he later moved to Ellerton. Then there was Inez Matt. She would sell things like nuts and fruits and little packages of biscuits and things like that. Then we had Tom Bellamy. His shop was a shop where he used to sell stamps. So we had quite a few shops in the area. And at a later stage, things like jukeboxes came into the area, and that provided some entertainment as well. So now we have moved on to things like karaoke. Now, there were 3 politicians that came from Greens. As I mentioned, I've already mentioned Air Hoppin, who had a shop. He was the representative though for St. George North, and he was also the owner of the Winter Garden Casino. He was the manager at the foundry, and he had a connection with the Frenches. So, you know, getting things for the shop would have been quite easy for him. Then we had Russell Lowe. He also had a shop on the front road at the corner just before you continue on to Bayer Road. Both of them have passed on, but Richard Bayer, right, also a politician and lawyer, right, he's also from this district. Well, the late Melvin Atwill, he was a lawyer. Then there's a young magistrate, Jared Richards. You've already met our poet laureate, Esther Phillips. Now, one of the most well-known soca artists in Barbados came up in this area, and that is the famous Lil Rick. Lil Rick is from 2nd Avenue Greens. And his uncle Dan Reed, I think quite a few people would remember him as well. He was the resident DJ at the Winter Garden Casino. Then Cort Roach, the Calypsonian, he's also from Greens. We also had an island scholar, Dr. Karen Padmore. She's from this area. She's now a podiatrist. Now, recently you would have read in the newspaper about Adrian Mapp and Dr. Judy Newton, who are contesting seats in elections in New Jersey and New York. They're also from this area. That's a brother and sister. They're also from this area. Now, I remember a lady by the name of Nidikai. You would have heard about her. She was mentioned as Miss Lewis, but Nidikai, a tiny but powerful lady. My brother told me that in 1955, when Janet touched down, her house was not the most stable, but every house around her was blown down, and hers was the only one that stood still. I don't know how she got her name, but anyway, she lived into her 90s as well.
Peoples, we store just got even better. Come on in. Come down to the new renovated People's Market in Tudor Bridge with bigger aisles and even more in store. All your general grocery needs. A whole new fruits and vegetables section. Beer, wine and liquor. A wide selection of meat and fish. And everything for your outdoor chilling and barbecue grilling. But most of all, everything at low prices. Right, Miss Edwards?
That's right, Ma. I know we have the People's Mall too.
People, come on down to the People's Market in Tudor Bridge.
We also had another character, I guess you can call his name Bo Jim. Bo Jim, I am told, was a man that believed that he could control spirits. So he had this little thing in a bottle that he called a man, that this man was called Manjar. And any time the children came around his house keeping any noise, he would threaten to put Manjar on them. So I don't know if any of the children were affected by these spirits, but he was one of the interesting characters that we had around. We even had a man that claimed he could fix light bulbs. We also had Vanessa Tempero. She got an athletic scholarship after she left St. George Secondary School. And she got an athletic scholarship and she went overseas in 1976. Then Henry Innes, the insurance executive, he also had an athletic scholarship. He's also from this area. He's from the front road. Then there's Jefferson Smallhead Proverbs and his brother Jack Proverbs. They are top domino players in the island as well. So as we come to the end, I just want to say that many of these traditions that you've heard about, they've died, but the community still flourishes, and it's a closely knit one where people still share their fruits and their vegetables and things like that with their neighbors. So to all of those who have paved the way to bring us to the standard of living that we have today, we want to say that we thank you and we honor you. And this is Greens, our community. Thank you.
And we thank you very much, Janice, for sharing your community of greens with all of us. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Until next week at the same time, it's goodbye for now and every blessing.
People want to know.